right, hello. We are going to get this started. This is my first time doing this. This is something I've been meaning to do for a while. And this is going to be a flip through of Eclipse Phase second edition. This is a TTRPG, a sci-fi TTRPG that dwells on ideas that I think most science fiction before it did not. And I think that this book has a lot of concepts that are just becoming more and more relevant as time goes on. We are butting against a lot of the ideas around AI and transhumanism that this book talks about. And I really think this book is underappreciated. I think it's one of the best TTRPG books out there, and I think it is honestly one of the best science fiction books I've ever read. So today I'm going to do a flip through of this book. So dig in. It's a big one. I plan on doing more of these for other TTRPGs. So we'll get to that in a second. But before we do that, I just want to talk about what Tabletop Bookshelf is. So Tabletop Bookshelf is a new online shop, just started maybe 10 days ago. And we are dedicated to expanding the hobby of tabletop role-playing games. And one way that I think, or that I feel I can do that, is by promoting creators, publishers that are, maybe not the mainstream genres that don't get appreciated enough. Because what the goal here is to expand the audience of people who play tabletop games, tabletop RPGs. And I think there's just a world of possibilities out there, of stories to be told, and Tabletop Bookshelf is a platform for those independent creators and publishers to get the word out. I'll be doing that through videos like this. And then, enthusiasts can go to tabletopbookshelf.com or visit us on any of our sales channels on Facebook, etc., and, acquire these things. And we have free shipping always, so I'll send it to you. And these copies of Eclipse Phase, these are shrink wrapped. I have a couple copies on the bookshelf. And if you're interested at the end of this, there will be a promo code, and you can get a deal on it in addition to the sale price that's already on our site. So let's dig into it. So Eclipse Phase second edition. This book starts off with this wonderful Carl Sagan quote, and it really, I think, gets to the heart of what this is about. It's about looking at computation and how, as we get into this world where computation becomes ubiquitous and, possibilities, and if we get to the possibility where human consciousness could be handled by computation, could be replicated, what does that mean for the world? And, this Carl Sagan quote about asking questions and finding risk really gets to the heart of this. And there are some horrible things that occur because of transhuman movement. And this book gets into all of that, really follows it to its logical conclusion. So we have our intro page here. This was created by Rob Boyle and Brian Cross. This second printing was done in 2019. The first one was actually 2009, so it's almost 14 years old now. But I encountered it, 10 years ago, and it just upended my world in terms of science fiction. I've been rooted in Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and all of that, and this really pushes sci-fi thought, I think, in a different direction. And it's pulling from other inspirations, but I think this brings it into such a complete package. And this is this is the table of contents here. We're talking 400 pages. So this is the opposite of a minimalist RPG. This is a maximalist RPG. It's full of crunch. It's full of details. Everything you need to run the game is within here, and it's beautifully presented, well laid out. So let's keep going. All right, so it starts off with a short story from the creator and a partner. And this short story is really, really great in establishing the world. And you can see in that picture there, it's got this sort of robot android creature with a big eyeball head. And, that's in the story. And I think this plays to the weirdness that is in this environment and all the strange things that can pop out of it. Really starts to get your imagination running of what transhumanism means and what it can mean for your stories. And again, there's great pictures throughout this book. This is another picture of, someone in a synthetic body, coming to the realization that they are in that synthetic body for the first time. And it really, gets again to that core of a lot of the questions and the themes of this book about what is a person? What is a person when their consciousness is not tied to their body? And that's really core to transhumanism, and that is core to this book and system. So after we get through that opening book, we go into our starting out, and this lays down, kind of what I shared with you. What exactly is Eclipse Phase? And of course, if you're new to role playing, a little bit of information there and a little bit of a guide for the book if you are a player or a game master. There's a lot of content, so it's good that it gives you this. And then there are some notes about politics and gender here. And, I think this is a game that deals with horrible things, deals with insanity. And I think this system, the authors make a point that, make sure that your group is comfortable with the themes that are going to be dealt with here. And so here we go, core concepts, right? The first core concept is transhumanism, which is that idea, that we are not tied to our bodies, that we can evolve past into new forms by putting our minds, our egos, is what they call them in the book, into different morphs, or bodies or morphs, or what they call it in this book. And that's done through resleeving, which means, your digital mind is downloaded, it is transferred into a new body. The other things that are really, important to think about when you're running these games is AIs are real. They are out there. And, in this world, in our current real world, we are dealing with these problems of artificial intelligence. And so this is another way for us to kind of explore those stories and understand those problems. And another key part of that, transhumanism, resleeving, our mind can be moved. A big part. Now, what is the logical conclusion of that? Well, that means that death doesn't mean very much. So what this does is it allows you to, you can imagine a person, if they are blowing up, there could be a backup copy of them in some sort of server somewhere. They can be reloaded into another, maybe they have some backup insurance, they're reloaded into another person or machine. A couple other concepts, the idea of the mesh, the idea that the internet is ubiquitous, it is everywhere, everything is connected. This is something that we are, I think, in the real world, we are beginning to get more and more comfortable with. And I think that this is, a natural progression of where we are going. We will be in a world where every device can be connected at any time. Other things here, we get to some of the, I think, threats that people have to deal with. There are these X risks, which are extinction level events. So this is the other piece. This is a story of transhuman survival. And what are they surviving against? Well, X risks. One of those X risks is that a Titan AI, which are these super powerful AIs, almost demolished all of humanity. So most of humanity has actually been destroyed, and Earth itself is a smoking husk. So all that's left for people is what you can see or what is available on other planets. And then alien exploration. This story does allow you to deal with aliens. So they're limited, but if you want to explore those alien stories, that is primarily done. There is an alien race that comes into like an amoeba-like alien race called the Factors, but they are more of you tend to interact with them less directly, and they try to be, I would say, in the background of the world most of the time. But the other way that you can interact with aliens is there are these teleportation gates, and that is something that we see now in the Expanse most recently, but of course Stargate previously. But having that in here allows your players and you to sort of tell those stories. Here's some more of those themes. We talked about that before. This is a post-apocalyptic story. This is a survival story. It's a horror story. Conspiracy plays a big part of it for your players. You're never going to reveal a lot of the deep secrets of this, and I will try to keep the spoilers out of this because I don't want to spoil the experience for any players. There are some amazing big secrets that the GMs get to hold on to, and I always think that's a great thing for a setting because it gives you a chance to sort of think about how am I going to reveal this to the players and what are the ways I'm going to do that. So how do you play this game? There are a couple different campaigns that they set up for you, and I think this is a good way to think of, like, if you're going to have a heroic character, or how is that character going to fit into this world? How are they going to do exciting things? Well, they have these. There are firewall campaigns, which are basically kind of like a covert organization that is dedicated to stopping existential risks to humanity. And who controls it? Who knows? It's part of the conspiracy. But you can imagine a world where your players are given kind of Mission Impossible style missions to go on, maybe against some of those extinction level threats even, and then having to go against those threats. Another idea, of course, is because there is that alien gates, a gate crashing campaign is a natural idea, a natural fit. Playing a group of people who are going through to alien worlds and dealing with whatever you find there. And then there is a criminal campaign where, this is where your players are probably a little bit more self-centered, but those can be fun too. If you've ever played, a game like Blades in the Dark, playing a criminal and doing crime can be a ton of fun, especially in this sort of over-the-top, hyper-powered setting. And then there are the 4 character archetypes. So typically there are a couple roles that your players and characters will fall into. This system's no different. There are combat players, there are social players, there are technical players that they're going to be dealing with hacking, working with drones, robots. And there are your knowledge players. So those are your scientists, your techies, maybe someone who's doing gene hacking. And then there is a short setting overview, and this is more meant for the players. They dig into this a lot more later, but there is the whole solar system is populated, other than Earth is populated too, but it's, much diminished. And there's a nice inner system, outer system dynamic where the inner system is, because it is closer to Earth and it has Mars, it has a little bit more of an established government. And then the outer system is a lot more anarchistic and a lot different ideas to talk about around. If you're not in this world where there are institutions to enforce laws, to do things like that, what does that lead to, especially in this transhuman context? And then finally, we start talking about how to play this. This is a D100 system. So what that means is all of your abilities have a score between 0 and 100. When you roll for a check on the score, you're typically trying to get as close to that score without going over. It's a fun system, and it allows, there's still criticals, and it's very easy, I think, to tweak those for the GM in this system when there is a check to say, we're going to give a -10 to that, we're going to give a +10 to that. So a really easy way for them to sort of tweak the difficulty on the fly. Another great dynamic picture here showing some transhuman throwing some mystery bottle to them. talks a little bit about initiative and time, and then starts getting into some of the character features. So the first thing they talk about is the pool system, and these are specific attributes that can be used, basically like a meta currency that can be played by the character to do certain things. They can ignore trauma with their moxie. They can take the initiative with their vigor. And then flex is really dynamic. So you can say, I'm going to introduce an NPC to this scene, or I'm going to introduce an item. It's something like the flashback mechanic in Blades in the Dark. And they recharge, pretty quickly. So your players are offered a lot of tools to do a lot of fun things. So when you make your characters, you're dealing with two pieces, because your mind can be separated from your body. So you have your ego stats, which are a little bit more permanent, and then you have your morph stats, and your morph is dependent on what morph you purchase. And you typically do that at the beginning of an adventure or of a mission. You're given morph points, and with those you are able to purchase different abilitied morphs, which we'll get to in a second. There's also rep. So for social and for working within certain networks or institutions, there is which I really like, is a nice spelled out reputation system in this game. And so that's another way, and it has real in-game impact. So, another way that you can reward or punish your players is through this rep mechanic. And then it gives you, step-by-step of how you're creating your character, and then finally talking about the backgrounds of all your characters. And I may have forgotten to mention this, but, another idea that you can play here is an uplift. So you can play a animal whose intelligence has been increased to, a human level. So you could play a super smart gorilla or a super smart octopus, which may seem silly, but octopuses are actually super smart creatures, and you can imagine in a 0G environment, an octopus would be a great shape to have. Be able to have all those manipulative tentacles move through space. And then you also pick a career. So this helps you flavor your character a little bit more. Are they the scientist? Are they the face? Are they a medic? Are they a soldier? And then there's also interest. So you can see you're getting a very layered character here. This is, again, a crunchy system. You're meant to really dig into these nooks and crannies of character creation and come up with something like very special, very unique. And I think a lot of players really could latch onto that. A session 0 is going to be a lot of fun. Aptitude. There are your skills, your aptitudes, and then there's different little customizations. So, there also is something called Sci-Slights, which I'll get to in a bit, and that's sort of your magic in this game, but it comes with a pretty hefty drawback. All right, so here are some of the skills and activities, and these are, the ways that your player is going to interact with the world or overcome challenges. And these are, again, it's pretty, I would say, again, crunchy. There's different ideas, and you can really do anything. So there's also an exotic skill option, which basically means you could be an expert in anything that your character desires. So again, very flexible. You can play whatever you want. Now we get to biomorphs or morphs. So these are the different sorts of bodies you can take. The first one are biomorphs, and those are ones that are, have mostly or primarily biological composition. So they're either born the old-fashioned way, or maybe they were grown in a vat. But a lot of these are typically, they take longer to make, and they might have a little bit more weakness than some of your mechanical ones, but they have a lot of advantages too. There's no, there's no hardwired cybernetics, no cyber brains. Now you could play a biomorph with a cyber brain, with a fully computer brain, but that is, when we're talking about purely biological, you get certain advantages, you can't be hacked, etc. Or at least in certain ways. And there's a lot of biomorphs. You can imagine with gene splicing technology, genetic engineering, there's a lot of different ideas of how you could shape biology, manipulate it. There are ideas like the Sylph, who's a morph that's like a charismatic morph, or there's a Fury, which is a combat morph. And now we have pods, and pods were, as they say in here, they were meant to be biological androids, so the parts are vat grown and then they're kind of put together. And pods typically have a cyber brain. So the idea here is this morph is a little bit easier to manufacture, and so it's a little bit more accessible throughout the environment, throughout the world. Now you get to your uplift morph. So this, I think, could be really appealing to some characters. There's your space octopus, and other options here too. I mean, I think a lot of people would gravitate towards playing a bird morph or an orangutan morph. And then there are synth morphs, and this is where it can get pretty weird. If it wasn't weird enough before, it can get weirder yet, because now you've got your technological, mechanical morphs in whatever shape you could imagine. It could be something small like a spare. You could imagine if your brain can be in anything, you could put it into a smaller robot, or you could put it into a swarm even. So you could imagine your intelligence being distributed across tons of little tiny creatures in a technologically advanced society. They're expensive. So all these morphs have MP, or morph points, and that's how you kind of control for your players or set a limit of what they can get to. So for instance, this Reaper morph, which is kind of a super combat morph, it's 12 MP. Most of the time, your players are not going to have access to a Reaper morph. And then finally, there are infomorphs. So you can also imagine in a world where people are, their egos are software or are data. You could run what's called an infomorph on top of that ego, and this is sort of a virtual reality only morph that your ego can operate on. So this is another gameplay possibility. You could have those sort of adventures where you are going into these deep digital worlds, sort of Tron, or but at a different level. And then you get certain loadouts based on what sort of campaign you're playing and what profession you pick. This speeds up the character creation process, gives you those starting that starting gear. And then there are different traits that the morphs have, and this gives you the details about what they all mean. And you can also use these. You can buy these. Some are good, some are bad. There are positive and there are negative traits. And again, a lot of flexibility here, a lot of crunch, a lot of different options. Severe allergy. They could have a severe allergy. They could have low pain tolerance. But on the flip side, they could have, digital speed or animal empathy. And then they give you in the middle here, character creation. I think if you are new to the system, it's going to be pretty daunting. But this book gives you a lot of example characters to start with. You could easily pick, they do recommend, they are set up as sort of teams. So this is your Firewall Sunward Ops team, these 4 here. So you could very easily get your group of 4 players together and say, hey, we're going to do Sunward Ops. Here's your player characters. Boom, 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 boom. Let's get going. Then we have your Rimward Ops players. These are your Gate Crashers, your Explorers of New Worlds. and these are your criminals. So, this isn't just giving you ways to get into the game fast. It's also instructions of how this game can be played, and the types of characters and the types of stories you're going to be able to tell. So now we get to a little bit more of the history. So this talks about, this really digs into all the different pieces of how we got to this sort of post-apocalyptic transhuman world. And this is like kind of a player facing, so you're not told everything here. And in a lot of these entries too, they give you a source. So this is kind of a lot of the pieces of fiction that are introduced in this book are from the perspective of somebody who lives in the world, or from a source within the world. So this kind of lays out the fall, what happened, how humanity slowly started to unravel, or the society slowly started to unravel, and then there were these titans, these super intelligent AIs that were sort of operating in the background, and they were disrupting society from the shadows for a while before they revealed themselves. And that's when things really started to take off, and they really started to just destroy humanity. And a lot of that was through, making humans fighting each other, but they also created some terrible technological things, like a robot that chops off people's heads and uploads their consciousness into this super AI. Just really terrifying, exciting ideas. And then you get a nice timeline here. And this takes place, present day is 10 years after the fall. So it's really, really quick after that post-apocalyptic experience has happened, after Earth has been ravaged and most people left. And that's the other thing is, a lot of people who left Earth in a hurry, they were not able to get out free or without pain. A lot of times what happened is people were just uploaded. Their egos were uploaded to servers because they couldn't get their bodies off in time. So now it talks about a little bit more about what the current future is like. What does it mean if you are beyond death? So this is a world where eternity is, or eternal life is the given. And, I would say Rob Boyle, I heard an interview with him, and he said, the interview asked him, what do you think is what's unique about your setting? And he said that idea of immortality for your characters, pardon me, as my cat takes a walk across here. All right. And I think that's a really great idea to have your players kind of deal with. Hey, kitty. And, there are some interesting ideas that leads to is, what does that mean if you were brought back from a backup? That means you have a gap in your reality. Like there was a version of you that maybe went on a suicide mission and died, and you don't remember anything about it. This, answers really interesting philosophical questions, or asks those really interesting philosophical questions, but also, I think opens up some really cool gameplay possibilities. It also allows you to play your character, I think, with a little bit more abandon. You know your character, unless they face a really terrible threat, they are going to come back. So you can say, I'm going to take this bomb and I am going to, hold on to it while I rush into this spaceship or attach to the side of it. There's a certain freedom that's there. Again, lots of details here about what the mesh means for society. Mind hacking, how you're, in this world where your mind is something like software or data, how can it be changed, manipulated? a little bit about, how people get to other worlds. So the other thing is, something unique is space travel is not the primary way that people travel long distances in space in this setting. Because your mind is data, you could transport that data. You could shoot that data across time and space to, get from maybe Mars to Pluto in a much shorter time than it would take a ship there. There is a lot of detail about habitats, so this is really helpful because, your players are going to go into different space stations, and this gives you some ideas of the forms that could take. Talks a little bit about how gravity reacts in those areas. And again, lots of detail, lots of crunch. And again, this points to the strength of this book. It's not just about the game. It's about the fiction. It's about the world. And it's just extremely detailed. Every idea of how would the world look like in this transhuman accelerated future, a lot of the logical implications have been played out and been deeply explored. And you see that in the writing. So here we go. We talk about culture. Culture is going to go through massive changes through these technological advances. It's going to change the way that we interact with each other. Even goes into, details about gaming. What does it mean? Then they talk about Earth. And, another thing that's nice here, you can see the layout a lot of the time, and Rob Boyle talked about this in an interview too. It's kind of this magazine layout where you are getting a complete concept in one 2-page spread here. So we're talking about Earth's legacy here, and then this one is culture. Here we're talking about sexuality. So again, this is something that's going to, I think, appeal to certain people who want to tell a certain story. What does that mean about gender and sexuality when again, your body is not permanent? Family and children, of course, wildly upended. Media and entertainment. If you are living in a world that's post-death, you can imagine sports could get a lot more dangerous. And then the political economy. So this is a game that's very political. This game allows you to, and it really plays out a lot of that divide through this system split, the inner system and the outer system, where the inner system is a lot more, looks like the old economy, and there are some active organizations that are enforcing this capitalist viewpoint, whereas the outer system is a lot more anarchist, communist. There's some techno-socialists out there too. But there is also this idea of there's a small enclave of bioconservatives. So you can imagine part of the backlash to transhumanism. And we even are starting to see that. I've seen some conservative pundits talk about transhumanism and how it's an abomination. So I think it's natural to imagine in this world there would be a group of people who see all this transhumanism as deviant, sinful, however you want to put it. Here it talks a little bit about the economy, how that's different. You can imagine how intellectual property is wildly upended in this world, where anything can be copied. Talks about indenturitudes. Again, a lot of these people who were on Earth, they were uploaded, and maybe their egos were uploaded into these servers. Maybe a corporation owns that server, and they say, look, you're only going to get out of your information state if you work for us. It's a great way to again, generate stories that the players have to interact with or provide background for your character. More economy. It talks about how there are fabricators, similar to what you may have seen in Star Trek Next Generation. Pretty much if you have access to a fabricator, you can build anything you need. So this is a post-scarcity economy. in many ways. But again, there are those forces that are pushing against that because they will lose the power. I'll give you some more examples of days in the outer and inner system, kind of give you an idea of how the culture is different. How does justice work in this world? Imagine it is very different because we are living in I think part of it is that it's very patchwork jurisdiction. So if you have, how can you enforce the laws of Mars on Jupiter? It's too far apart. Then it talks about how law is actually implemented. In some places there may be an old school kind of judicial system, but for example, in a fully libertarian institute, there's the part of this world is it allows you to push a political ideology to its extreme and see what a society would be like in that sort of world. And so there's this ideas of these hyper libertarians, these extropians, and they have, or anarcho-capitalists might be a better way. That's how they describe it in here. Really, everything is done by contracts. There's even private judges. Crime is totally upended. Violence, murder. What does murder mean in a post-death society? It's still frowned upon, but it's not the same sort of thing. And then it gets into the more details. So if you want to know the exact politics of these different institutions within the inner system, this is going to dig into that. And then the outer system polities, and you can see here, you're getting your anarchists, autonomous alliance. That is the idea of these anarchists kind of banding together to get a little bit of autonomy from the inner system groups that are, see the anarchists as a threat both to their resources and their way of life. Jovian Republic, that's going to be your bioconservative republic. And you can see little, indications of cultural symbols, in some of these logos, kind of giving you a hint of where they came from, where their history, what their history is tied to. Your Titan Commonwealth, this is your techno-socialists, hoping that technology will help drive humanity, transhumanity forward. Different social movements to deal with, to explore. And then there are corporations, a lot of, though there are these anarchist elements, there are still corporations that get together to do large economic projects. It digs into a little bit of how you're going to deal with that. And, all of this stuff has to be brought up because this is, a game that deals not just with physical combat, but a lot of times with political intrigue. So it's helpful to have all of these details, including religion. Again, religion is going to be wildly upended in this sort of technological world. Crime groups that you can be a part of. And there are some great ideas here, like the Pax Familia. So there's this idea in this world that there are... you can fork yourself, so you can basically create a copy of yourself. And this is a criminal outfit where every member of it is a fork or a clone of the original member. It's a great example of them taking an idea, pushing it to its logical conclusion within a certain context. And then there is this idea of firewall. And firewall, you can be a firewall operative. Firewall plays a big part in the game. They serve as the dispenser of missions and sort of a way for your players to get some direction. But they're also, deeply secretive. So there's always this conspiracy thing going on behind the scenes as well. Nice little map of the solar system there. And then we get to the system gazetteer. So this is again where even if you never play the game, there's so many ideas. Every planet from Sun out to Pluto, There's a little bit of detail here describing what this futuristic life looks like. There's Venus, Earth, and Earth orbit. A little picture of what's left there. Here's Luna. So the moon obviously remains was a big point, a big stop-off point for a lot of these transhuman refugees, and so it's an economic powerhouse. Mars, there's a group that feels that Mars is the new home of humanity. Terraforming efforts going on there. You get to the asteroid belt, and you get further into Jupiter, talking about Jovians, those bioconservatives, and the different moons, the moons of Jupiter that they live on. Saturn and Titan. And we're getting out there, Uranus and Neptune. And finally out into the fringe. So there's even, there are even things further out than our planets that your players could potentially go to. That's a great way to sort of push limits and explore some really dark areas. Then there are these ideas of quarantine zones. So these titans that destroyed most of humanity, they left. Something happened. And they disappeared. And so transhumanity was given a bit of a respite. But there are still these places where there are, the taint of the Titans still exists. These quarantine zones. Again, gameplay possibilities. And here's your picture of the gates. So this is not your Stargate. It's a big spherical object. But I like this kind of shape. It's very... it's a little bit more mysterious and horrific, biological and mechanical put together, and talks a little bit about some of the planets and systems that are beyond these gates. All right, so now halfway into this book, we start getting to rules. How do you deal with combat? Combat's going to happen in this game. It's going to be brutal. And now, it will be highly dependent on what you're facing against. But typically, in a game where death is not the end, you may want to introduce a few little things to get people warmed up. But you want to bring on the heat to your players. You want to bring on big monsters, big creatures, have them really struggle, maybe die against those creatures. And you are given a lot of tools and a lot of different options of how you want to fight. What type of firing mode you're doing, what type of range you're at. Again, a lot of crunch here. There may be the idea that, maybe this is going to slow down the game a bit. Well, I think it once you get a handle of it, it's going to move pretty quickly. And if you are playing on a VTT or something like that, it's going to do that heavy lifting for you. Again, lots of different toys. There's beam weapons. There's spray weapons. There's kinetic weapons, your rail guns, your sniper rifles. There's different types of seekers and grenades. So again, a lot of these are not out of line for your players to get on a mission. So if they want to get a seeker pistol for a mission, it's not going to be something that's out of range for them in most cases. They may have to burn some reputation to get it. But your players should be encouraged to play with all the toys that they can get. And then there's armor. There is armor. Lots of options there as well. Lots of mods. Different kinds of special attacks. And then it starts talking about health. So you have your health, your physical health, and you also have your mental health. Because again, your body has its own, your morph has its own damage points and the way that it will deal with physical action, but the mind is different. And that's where you get to mental health. And again, this is going to be dealing with those ideas of mental health trauma. This is not going to be an appropriate story for everyone. So you just got to be careful when you're starting this game that expectations are set about the kind of things that people will deal with. And there is a stress mechanic. And that stress, when it reaches a certain point, it's going to leave you with trauma. And there are ways to recover that. There's this idea of psychosurgery. So if your mind is code, you could go into it and change those bad memories or change those disorders. A little bit more details. How do you deal with size? How do you deal with surprise? Common combat situations. There's even an idea of a social attack. So this is a nice system for dealing with social encounters. It gives your social players a little bit more crunch to deal with. Movement. There's lots of, we are dealing with Morse with lots of different body shapes. There's different ways that you can move. There's also lots of vehicles. There's boats. There's hovercrafts. There's snakes. So there's just again, lots of different options. It's like a gigantic toy box for your players. Lots of things to play with. Lots of ideas to explore. You got to talk about materials. I mean, this is also hard sci-fi, I would say. Now, it does have some fantasy elements that it's dealing when you're talking about, some of the psi-slights, maybe some of the aliens, but a lot of the core of the game is still rooted in hard sci-fi. So it's rooted in ideas of physics. It's rooted in ideas of chemistry. And so they talk about future materials. And again, if you never played the game, you could still explore these ideas with the game. There are environmental factors. So these are, dangers that your players are certainly going to encounter. Asphyxiation, falling, gravity. What does it look like in these worlds? What does gravity transition zone look like? What happens in a vacuum? And downtime activities. So downtime is also a big part of this game too. So you can imagine you're using that time to acquire certain objects, mod yourself. You have the time. You could maybe, with your fabricator, make a super awesome modification and get it added to your morph, Now we dig into more details about the mesh. And so again, it's that idea of a ubiquitous internet. This, the interesting thing about this, I would say, is, how it deals with, if you have this interconnectedness and everyone is always on that mesh, what does that mean? Well, it again, pushing those ideas to their logical conclusion. Well, what does an AR game look like when everyone is connected all the time in this world? AR is just at a different level in this sort of world. Any sort of, you could imagine wherever you are in any place, you could use your biomechanical, your cybernetic implants to put a different look to reality. You could play a game anywhere. You could even block people. You could say, I don't want to see, Jim ever again. And you can say in your AR, I'm going to block Jim out. I'm going to filter that person. And again, these are ideas that we are seeing explored in Black Mirror. But these ideas were in this book over a decade. These ideas were in Eclipse Phase over a decade ago. So in a lot of ways, what I'm seeing is fiction and other mediums catch up to the ideas that have already been presented in this book. So lots of different devices, apps. If you are a hacker and you want to play that sort of game, this is where you want to explore the different ways that you can interact with your hacking, the different things you can do. And a lot of that is going to be, again, in a mesh world, everyone knows where you are all the time. And so this world allows you to sort of think about, if everyone's connected all the time, how do you work covertly in that environment? Now we get to AI. So AI, of course, is ubiquitous in this world as well. And there's this idea of muses, so much so that everyone has a muse that is sort of implanted in their brain, an AI who's their companion, who helps take care of the busy work. So this is a great idea because you can hand wave a lot of stuff that might not be very exciting and say, well, my muse takes care of that. So it allows you to focus on the more exciting parts of gameplay. It also creates a role-playing opportunity. Now, it would be overload for a GM to have to role-play all these AI. So they have a great idea here of having, another player role-play the muse of another player. So I think that's a fun way to create more role-playing elements. And you're not gonna talk to your muse super often, but when you do, it's a good possibility there. Gets into more deal about infomorphs. Can they be copied, deleted? How you do research. So for your knowledge characters, they're going to be doing research. And, the research in this world is probably going to open up different ways of getting through challenges or different ideas or lore about the world. Here's those ideas of tracking and the different ways that people can be tracked and how you would fight against that. Here's all the different sort of hacking, so all the details on hacking and how you would go through that sort of hacking. So again, this is more, we're still in the mesh section. I've been flipping for a while, but we are still talking about the mesh. There are different, it really is getting into detail of like if something goes bad, what's going to happen to your characters? What are ways that you can deal with problems? How can you subvert systems? And they really have to get into the details here because the world is just so very different. A lot of the typical assumptions are going to fall apart. So I really appreciate that they dig into it. And then, mindware hacking, another great picture here. Someone getting their mind hacked. Virtual reality, definitely a thing. Much more advanced. You can imagine people living their whole lives in VR. Saying I'm done with this post-apocalyptic world. I'm gonna jack into VR and I'm gonna be there for the rest of my life. Psi, as I mentioned before, is something of the magic system, but as you can tell from this picture, where there's some people with a child here with corpses around him, has some terrible dangers. There's even a little short story here, or a little piece of fiction talking about those dangers. And you can sort of think of it as a Jekyll and Hyde scenario. So you may be using your size, and then you may go to sleep and you wake up the next day, and in your locker you find a half-created alien artifact. Well, how did that get there? I don't remember building that. Who built that? Here's all the different sleights. Those are kind of spells or powers. And then we get into all the tech. So this gets into more details about what is it? How do our consciousness get stored in a person? So there's this idea of a cortical stack, which is kind of in the back of the brain of all of these morphs. It's the real-time backup of where an ego is. So if you if you die, that cortical sac could be retrieved, and so you would have your memory up to the moment of death. Now, that, of course, having that memory of your death is going to create stress as well. Talks about resleeving, how you get into other morphs, how you acquire morphs. The idea of forking and merging, how you can make copies of yourself. And you could imagine forking eventually running amok as players multiply themselves, create this force multiplier. Well, there's there's definitely, I think, enough tools here that the GM can sort of rein that in. Obviously, it's a lot of political environments, institutions are not going to look kindly on these forks. In addition, there's this idea that a fork is eventually going to have its own free will. It's a person. You can merge it back into yourself. Maybe it doesn't want to be merged. Here's that. Gets into details about merging. Different ways in which identity are controlled. There's different, how it is stored. Again, this kind of gets into the idea of tracking, but how you can create fake IDs, different types of IDs, and how you get into habitats. A little bit about space travel, but again, space travel here and space combat, they're not meant to be at the forefront. And again, this is a little bit different from other science fiction systems and games where they really want to see that space combat. You want to see that. This says, no, it's silly. People can, teleport their consciousness across without having to use it. And ships are, slow and unwieldy, and but they're definitely there. But they are more setting than they are something for the players to utilize or take action with. Gets into more ideas about reputation, and then gear. So more crunch here. Lots of different gear. You're given a certain amount of gear points every mission, and then this gives you the idea of the different services or items you could get with that gear. There are different, augmentations that you can get for your morph. Again, just a ton of crunch. A lot of different combat augmentation. Do you want your character to have poison glands? Maybe you do. More physical augmentations. Get that prehensile tail. Get some gas jets. The only barrier there, there's the GP barrier, but there's also time. It takes time for these things to get installed. And I would say most missions, you probably want to put your characters on a clock so they are not sitting around tinkering all, the whole time. Apps that you can buy. Talks about different creatures that you could get. Why not get a pet dinosaur? Of course, in the future, they're going to have genetic recreations of dinosaurs. Chemicals and drugs. Drugs and chemicals, big part of this game as well. I think it's nice that it doesn't shy from that. A lot of TTRPGs won't go into these areas, but again, this is dealing with a lot. It's because it is that idea of ego and your mind. It's going to deal with all the facets of that, including the manipulation of your mind using substances. The interesting thing I think about the drug system here is that if you're exposed to a drug, there's no save. You are affected by it. So really it's about the after effects of the experience of that exposure. And it's the same way with poison and other chemicals as well. And there's a lot of different types of drugs, a lot of different types of toxins. Different comms and mesh gear. There is the mesh, but there's also different ways of communicating through lasers, and there's just going to be different scenarios where communication of one type might be blocked for one reason or another. You've got to know other types. Different espionage gear. How do we there's a portable EMP field, for instance, that would called a bug zapper strips. Imagine setting this thing down and it's an EMP field that's stopping any sort of nanoswarm or microswarm that's coming into your area. Then it talks a little bit about mission gear, stuff that's going to be a little bit more specific towards individual missions, particularly like gate crashing. I think those survival tools are going to come in handy there. Nano fabricators, how are you making these different, you need a fabricator to make other things. What do those fabricators look like? What does it take to acquire one? Then there are the swarms, the microswarms and the nanoswarms, little tiny robots. and then goes to the bigger robots. Again, and they all just have a value. Your character could pick one up, use one for a mission, get into their awesome bike there. Lots of details on all the different sorts of vehicles. They have a little bit of detail on spacecraft here. Again, like not a lot, but enough to give you an idea. And everything is rare. These are not something that are bought by players. Then at the very end here, we talk about running the game. They give you, how do you get your players interested in it? They start with the elevator pitch, which I think is great because you can't play the game if you don't have players for that game. So how do you get your players excited about this game? And then how do you craft, this is really helpful too. What does an Eclipse Phase campaign look like? It's going to not, what I like about this is they say that you should commit to a fixed length campaign, which is great. I love those sort of campaigns where you say, this is going to be a three session campaign, or this is going to be a 6 session campaign. Really sets expectations for everybody. And I think gives people when people are new to a system too, it gives them a nice way to know, okay, this is when it's going to end. This is where I should be on that journey. Lots of tips about how to play the game, how to engage with these themes in your stories, and then what kind of rewards you get. And you either get these res points, which you can use to, and they're doled out a lot of times by GM fiat, I would say. But there's a lot of options here of advancing your character. It's a nice thing is that even though if you have a fixed number of stories or sessions, you're going to see your character go through some serious advancement. And you're also going to see them deal with this reputation change, which could be a lot of fun. And then at the end, you get to your threats and X risks here. So this is what are your players going to face? This is the secret history, which I will not go into, but for the GMs, it gives you sort of those deeper ideas or deeper fiction that you can slowly reveal to your player as you see fit. Kind of reveal, and those reveals are always a great thing for your players. Traps, security systems, so doors, traps, even in space, there are some really just, in this world, there are some really terrible ideas for traps. So, something like a tube chipper, which basically creates a suction, sucks everyone down the tunnel and turns them into chips. This kind of gets to the idea too that this game also deals with a lot of weirdness, and that can create some humorous moments, and you should lean into that. Definitely, should always be laughter at the table. They talk a little bit about how you deal with threats. Instead of having those different ability pools, they simply have a threat pool. So the GM has a device to make a threat be stronger in the moment. Nice little, I think I call that like a challenge dial, an ad hoc challenge dial that they can use on the fly. And then there are these terrible ex-humans. So this is this idea that there's this, it's transhumanity taken to terrible conclusions. So maybe someone whose idea of evolution or advancement involves going beyond what a human could be, and it creates these terrible abominations like these limb walker, these neural nodes, these like kind of hyper intelligent brain creatures, these terrible predator creatures. You can imagine. I think it would be fun to do a whole campaign where you're just dealing with ex-human threats. These are just examples. It could be a lot more. And dealing again with that exurgent virus. There's also this virus that gives you size is also it's out there. It's kind of hidden in places, but it can pop up. It's ever evolving. It can deal with biological. It can deal with mechanical. So it's kind of this always on the table threat that you can use to sort of introduce really terrible, horrific circumstances that your players have to deal with. And then, what happens when they get infected by this virus? It may mean that, it's time for that morph and that mind to be obliterated and a backup to be restored. A lot about it. So again, the amount of focus on the virus gives you a lot of options and stories to tell around it. So I think it's telling you that, like, if you're going to play an Eclipse Phase story, make sure you spend some time on this. And then you have these other exurgent types. So it's sort of, if the virus has fully taken hold, just again, like terrible creatures. Really, this is where the horror element comes through. And there's a lot of them. There's these shifts, and a lot of these too. You're given just different, because of their shapes. There's like a lot of different possibilities. You could probably do like a mission kind of centered around a lot of these major, or a couple of these exurgents. The factors are the aliens. So they do give you, if you ever do want to interact with them, gives you an idea of how to interact with these amoeba-like creatures. And then talks about firewall. So your players are going to be interacting with firewall as they're on their missions. What does that look like? Who are the people that they interact with? How do you set that up for them? Who are some of the other? There's this other sort of secretive group, Project Ozma. It gives you another sort of competing intelligence group to come in and mess things up for your players and to compete against. More details about the gates and what the Titans have left behind. And if you ever do want to have your players, while the Titans may have left, some of their remnants are still behind. So if your players, and again, this is great for a firewall mission, if your players want to interact with those creatures or with those Titan AIs, this gives you some mechanisms to do that. And again, here are those headhunters, those terrible robots that chop off your heads and upload your ego. All right, and then a few more high-level Titan threats to end it before we get to the glossary. A nice extensive glossary because there's lots of new concepts introduced. A very extensive set of references. A lot of fiction to dig into and nonfiction and different movies that inspired or that it takes inspiration from. And you can see it. You can see these all. They all kind of, this is the petri dish that created the story and the different role-playing games to try. A really great index. And then some quick reference sheets at the end. So when you're playing, sitting down at the table, playing with your players, bring up these quick sheets to get quick information on the morphs. A rules primer here that you can have your characters do quick references on, and then your character sheets that you can download. And then at the end, you get one more final quote from Emma Goldman: "To the daring belongs the future." Good motivation for your players. And that's it. And that's how now we're at the end of the book. So I'm just, this is my first time doing this. I really just wanted to get more eyes on what I think is a really underappreciated piece of work here. This is a incredible, just look at this book. This is one of the thickest role-playing books I have on my library. It's got, 2 bookmark ribbons on it. And there's just so many ideas in here. Even if you didn't play the game, you would get your value out of being exposed to these ideas that have been, really fully explored and really thought about in a way that I think you only think about when you play in that world, because your characters are forced, the GM and the party group is forced to sort of wrestle with, well, what does it mean in this world if my character does this or does that? What does it mean in a world without death when my character wants to do X, Y, Z? So this is just a great value. Everyone should have it on their book if you're a sci-fi fan, if you're a TTRPG fan. And I have it on my shop at tabletopbookshelf.com or any of the other channels. This is my personal open copy. The copies that I will send are vacuum sealed, and I do everything free shipping. And if you want a discount, there will be a code below. All right, that's it. I am signing off. Stay tuned, and I'll talk to you next time.